The wind howled through the pines like a mourning spirit, scattering snow across the high trails of the Wind River Range. Winter had come early to the mountains, and with it, the silence of death. Clara May McKinley, 11 years old and barefoot, stumbled through a frozen glade, her cheeks blistered red and eyes glassy with fever. Her dress, once lavender with small yellow flowers, was torn and stiff with dried blood, not her own, but her mother's. She hadn't spoken in 2 days. Not since the fire, not since the screams. Her small frame moved with stubborn instinct more than will, weaving between trees like a ghost. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but she no longer noticed. The cold had become a companion, numbing everything except the single, hot coal of memory burning in her chest. They had been riding west in a wagon train when the riders came. 5 of them, faces covered in bandanas, eyes wild. They struck just before dawn, guns flashing, horses screaming. Clara had hidden beneath the flour sacks, clutching her doll, now lost somewhere in the snow, and listened to her world being ripped apart. When it ended, she ran. She hadn't stopped. A raven cawed above her, sharp as a knife. She looked up, stumbled on a root, and collapsed face first into the snow. For a moment, she didn't move. She was so tired, the kind of tired that made you think sleep could cure anything, even death. Then crunch. A sound. Not the wind. She turned her head slowly, snow clinging to her lashes. A shadow moved between the trees. Tall, broad-shouldered, silent. She wanted to scream, but her throat was too dry, her lips too cracked. Another step. Whoever it was didn't call out. The shadow crouched beside her. Dark eyes met hers, calm, watchful, ancient. A face framed with braids, wind-burned and creased by time. He wore buckskins stitched with faded beads, a knife sheathed at his side. A hunter. Not white. Not like the men who'd killed her family. He didn't speak, only looked at her for a long moment, then reached into a pouch and brought out a piece of dried meat. He broke it, offered a sliver. She stared, unsure. Another crunch in the snow. He stood, scanned the woods, then looked back at her. His voice, when it came, was low and quiet, like snow settling on bark. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was gentle. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. Clara wanted to resist, to scream or claw or run, but the warmth of his coat was too much. Her head lolled against his chest as he walked, his boots leaving deep prints beside her lighter ones. The forest swallowed them both. Later. How much later, she couldn't tell. Clara woke in a small shelter built into the side of a rock face. Smoke curled from a narrow chimney. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and meat cooking over a low fire. Blankets covered her, soft and heavy, and her feet were wrapped in rabbit fur. Across the fire sat the man. He added a twig to the flames, careful, deliberate. When he noticed her waking, he didn't move, just gave a single nod. Clara sat up slowly. Her body ached. She looked around. There were no walls, just rock and hides stretched to block the wind. A wooden bowl waited near the fire. He slid it toward her with a stick. Warm broth steamed in the cold air. She reached for it with trembling hands, drinking without question. Salt and marrow, rich and smoky. It filled her in a way she hadn't felt in days. He watched, never speaking. When she finished, he pointed to himself, then thumped his chest. "Tosa," he said. Clara stared. He pointed again. "Tosa." Understanding dawned. She hesitated, then touched her chest. "Clara," she whispered. A flicker of something crossed his face. Approval, perhaps. He nodded once, then turned his gaze back to the fire. That night, she slept in his shelter, wrapped in layers of warmth, belly full. Outside, the wind continued its long mourning. She didn't know where she was. She didn't know who Tosa truly was. But for the first time since the fire, she didn't dream of screams. In the morning, he showed her how to warm her hands over the coals without burning them. When she coughed, he brought her pine needle tea. He didn't ask questions, and she didn't give answers. They existed in a quiet rhythm, speaking through gestures, glances, and silence. By the 3rd day, she followed him when he left the shelter. He moved like a shadow through the woods, silent and precise. She struggled to keep up, stumbling in snowdrifts, but he never scolded. When she fell, he waited. When she asked nothing, he taught anyway. At dusk, they returned with snares full of snowshoe hares. He let her hold one, warm and twitching in her hands, and she realized she was still capable of feeling wonder. The cold lessened, or maybe she'd grown stronger. On the sixth night, while Tosa carved wood by the fire, she finally spoke. "They killed my mama," she said. Her voice cracked. He didn't look up, just kept carving. The knife made slow, steady strokes. She swallowed. "I saw them. The men who did it." Now he looked at her. His eyes were steady, unreadable, but not unkind. A long silence passed. Then he set the carving, a small bird, beside her. She picked it up, held it to her chest. The fire popped. In the distance, far beyond the trees, a new sound rose, a wolf's howl. But there was something else under it, fainter, like the crack of wood. Or gunfire. Clara tensed. Tosa looked toward the mountains. His eyes narrowed. He rose, walked to the edge of the shelter, and peered into the dark. The silence returned, but something had changed. The air had a weight to it now, a tension. Clara watched him, the carved bird clenched in her hands. And though she didn't understand the words he muttered, she understood the way he said them. Something was coming. The sun barely touched the ridges that morning, its light pale and brittle through the frozen pines. Clara stirred beneath a thick layer of hides, the warmth around her a deceptive comfort in a place where frost could take a life in an hour. She blinked against the cold air and the strange reality that had become her world, a world of silence, snow, and a man who moved like he belonged to the mountains more than to mankind. Tosa crouched near the fire, his hands methodically tying sinew to a length of polished wood. He was making a bow. The morning light caught the gray strands in his braids, and Clara noticed for the first time how old he looked. Not in a feeble way, but in a weathered, deeply rooted way, like the cliffs that stood unmoved by wind or time. She sat up. Her throat was sore, but she no longer coughed. Her legs ached less. She could feel strength creeping back into her limbs, like the sun crawling through a frozen forest. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "We go." Clara blinked. "Go where?" Tosa pointed toward the ridge. "Traps. Food. No good stay here." She nodded, unsure whether she felt relief or fear. The days in his shelter had wrapped her in a strange cocoon, safe, but suspended. Now she had to move again. She didn't want to. She also couldn't bear the thought of staying still. They walked in silence. The snow was deep, but firm underfoot. Tosa moved ahead, his boots barely making sound. Clara watched his every motion, how he paused before each step, how he tilted his head to listen to the wind, the birds, the nothingness. She imitated him as best she could. He didn't correct her, but once, when she stepped too loud, he glanced back and gave a short nod, approving the adjustment. The traps were spread across a vast crescent of land, carefully hidden snares tucked between fallen logs, branches arranged to guide animals into their fate. Most held nothing. One had a hare, and Tosa handled it swiftly. A quiet prayer, a clean break of the neck, and it was over. As they made their way down a slope, Clara hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" Tosa didn't stop walking. "You were lost. But you don't know me." This time he paused. "Mountain gave you to me. I don't question Mountain." She didn't quite understand, but the words stuck with her. They continued, the woods darkening with dense trees. The sky above grew cloudy. As they approached a narrow clearing, Tosa froze, one hand raised. Clara halted behind him, holding her breath. He moved forward, slow and low. Then he knelt, brushing snow aside to reveal a single hoof print. "Horse," he murmured. "Not mine." He rose, eyes scanning the trees. Clara's heart pounded. Her gaze darted to every shadow. Tosa turned back, his face unreadable. "We go now." Quiet. They returned a different route, weaving through brush and stone. Tosa moved faster now, always looking behind. He did not speak again until the shelter was in sight. Inside, he relit the fire low and small, using moss instead of dry wood. Less smoke. He handed Clara a strip of dried meat and sat with his back to the wall. She watched him. "You think someone's following?" His jaw tightened. "Maybe." "Who?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled from his satchel a cloth bundle, which he unwrapped slowly. Inside was an old revolver, its metal dull, the grip worn smooth by time. Clara stared. It didn't fit him. Tosa was a man of bows and blades, of silence and distance. Yet he held the gun like someone who had once known it well. "I used to fight," he said quietly. "Long ago, before I came here." Clara's breath hitched. She wasn't sure why, but the words felt like more than a confession. "Soldiers." He shook his head. "Not their wars. My own. I tracked, hunted men, found people others couldn't." He paused, eyes fixed on the flames. "I thought I left all that behind." Clara hugged her knees. "They might be the same ones," she whispered. "The men who came from my family." He met her gaze. "Maybe." A heavy silence settled between them. Then Tosa leaned forward and stirred the fire. "I teach you something now," he said. "Tomorrow too late." The next morning, before the sun had climbed over the peaks, Tosa showed her how to walk without leaving prints. She followed in his footsteps, placing her feet exactly where his had landed. He showed her how to make the shape of a rabbit track with a stick, how to scatter pine needles to mask disturbed snow. He handed her a small blade, bone-handled, sharp. "Always carry. Not for killing, for cutting rope, skinning, defending." Clara took it with trembling fingers. "Have you killed people?" He didn't answer. That night, the sky cracked open with snow, thick and relentless. The shelter groaned under its weight. Tosa added another layer of hides and leaned a woven screen against the opening to keep out the wind. Clara couldn't sleep. She watched the fire flicker low, listened to the wind scream across the ridges. "Tosa," she asked. He opened his eyes but didn't speak. "If they come, will you fight them?" He didn't blink. "Yes." She swallowed. "Even if you don't want to go back to that life." He considered this, then nodded once. "I will do what the mountain asks." The fire hissed as a log shifted. Clara pulled her blanket tighter. "Are you afraid?" Tosa closed his eyes again. "Of what?" "That they'll find us." "No," he paused. "I am only afraid of what I'll have to become if they do." For days, they saw nothing. But Tosa's vigilance never faded. He checked snares less often. He stopped lighting fires before dawn. He began stacking rocks in certain ways, watching for whether they had been moved. Clara learned more in a week than she had in years. How to hear the difference between a bird's warning call and its song. How to taste the wind and guess what it carried. Then, one evening, Clara returned from gathering kindling to find Tosa crouched near the edge of the shelter, staring through a pair of trees. His face was carved from stone. She followed his gaze. Far off, across a narrow ridge, a flicker of orange. Firelight, too high for lightning strike, too bright for accident. Someone else had made camp. Tosa stood, took a breath, and picked up the revolver. He checked its cylinder, then tucked it into a hide-wrapped belt. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Are we leaving?" "No," he said. "They are not moving. They are watching." A cold knot formed in her stomach. Tosa stepped outside, scanned the ridgeline, then disappeared into the snow. Clara waited, knife in hand, every sound magnified by her pulse. When he returned, his breath was white steam. "3 men," he said. "One tall, one with red scarf, other has rifle." Clara's voice shook. "That's them." He nodded slowly, unsurprised. "They are waiting for darkness." Her hands clenched around the blade. "What do we do?" Tosa knelt beside her. "We prepare." The fire burned low behind him, casting long shadows on the rock. "We are not prey," he said. "Not tonight." The wind blew bitter and dry through the pines, carrying with it the scent of smoke and old blood. Clara crouched in silence beneath a thicket of bare-limbed scrub, eyes fixed on the ridgeline above. There, flickering like the warning glint in a predator's eye, was the faint orange glow of the outlaw's fire. It hadn't moved in days. 3 men, maybe more. She didn't need to see their faces again to know. She remembered the red scarf, the tall one's twisted grin, the sound of laughter when her world had burned. Tosa lay motionless beside her, his cheek pressed to the frozen earth. In his hand, a length of taut rawhide attached to a pine branch trigger, one of the traps he'd rigged at dawn. His breath came slow and steady, eyes locked on a gap in the brush where someone might step, unaware. "They are patient," he murmured, barely audible. "Hunters, not foolish." Clara nodded. Her hands were numb from holding the knife too long, but she didn't lower it. She had seen what these men were capable of. They didn't need reasons. They took. They destroyed. That they were here now, days after the ambush, meant one thing. They knew she'd escaped. And they weren't finished. Later, back at the shelter, Tosa drew lines in the snow with a stick, a map etched in cold silence. "They watch from here," he said, tapping a ridge. "But they move." One came near snare. Left boot print too deep. Heavy man. Wears spurs. Clara frowned. "That's the one who dragged my father from the wagon. He laughed when he did it." Tosa didn't comment. He pointed to a narrow canyon nearby. "They will try to trap us here. Force us down. Easier to catch. We won't run." "No," he said. "We make them come. We decide where." That night, they worked in darkness. Clara followed him through thickets, placing sharpened stakes in shallow pits. They built dummies out of hides and broken branches, posted them in the snow like decoys. Tosa smeared ash on Clara's cheeks to mask her scent, the smell earthy and sharp. She watched him as he worked. In the flicker of moonlight through the trees, he didn't look like a man anymore. He was something else, something old and dangerous, a memory of violence carved into flesh. "Tosa," she whispered. "Who were you?" He paused. "Once, men called me Ghost of War." The name felt strange on her tongue. "Why?" "I hunted men who thought they were hunters. Like these." Clara shivered. "Did you always win?" He didn't smile. "No one wins in war." At dawn, they waited. The forest was unnervingly still. Even the birds were silent. Clara sat nestled in a cluster of boulders, her heart thudding like hooves against frozen ground. Tosa stood beside her, bow strung and arrow notched, his posture relaxed but alert. It didn't take long. They came like wolves, quiet, swift, low to the ground. 3 figures, each moving in a wide crescent around the shelter. Clara recognized them even from a distance. The red scarf, the tall one with the long legs and the crooked gait, the man with spurs who scanned the trees like a born killer. She swallowed bile. "They expect a frightened girl," Tosa whispered. "Let them." The first trap snapped with a vicious crack, sending the red scarf outlaw tumbling into the snow, howling in pain. A spike had pierced his thigh. His gun clattered beside him. The others moved faster now, shouts breaking the silence. The tall one opened fire in the direction of the shelter, sending bullets whistling through empty air. One struck a decoy hide, tearing it open. He laughed, thinking he'd hit something real. Tosa moved like a shadow through the brush. His arrow found the tall one's shoulder before he even saw where it came from. The man screamed, staggered backward, and fell into a shallow ravine. Spurs kept coming. He was older than the others, meaner. His face was scarred along the jawline, and his eyes were cold and blue as river ice. Clara froze as he passed within 10 feet of her hiding place, his revolver swinging in slow arcs. Then his head turned, too fast. He caught a glimpse of something. Her foot? Her breath? Clara didn't wait. She burst from cover and ran. He shouted, cursing, gun raised. A shot rang out and missed, slamming into a tree trunk inches behind her. She zigzagged, just like Tosa had taught, not looking back. Her feet barely touched the ground as she darted into the clearing where the snow lay shallow and marked with tracks. Spurs followed, and he fell straight into the trap. The rope snapped tight around his ankle, yanking him skyward with a violent jolt. His gun flew from his hand. He screamed as he dangled upside down, arms flailing. Clara skidded to a stop, panting. She stared up at him, heart pounding. His face twisted with fury. "You little." Tosa appeared behind her, silent as smoke, knife drawn. "Don't," Clara said, her voice steady. "Let me." She stepped forward, took the revolver from where it had landed. It felt heavy, solid, real. She leveled it at the outlaw, hands trembling only slightly. "Why'd you kill them?" she asked. "We didn't do anything." He sneered, spitting blood. Because we could. Tosa stepped beside her. Justice, he said softly, not rage. Clara stared at the man, then at the gun in her hand. She lowered it. I'm not like you. The outlaw laughed, cruel and loud. Then you'll die like them. Tosa walked over and cut the rope. The man crashed to the ground with a sickening thud and did not rise. Later, they dragged the outlaws to a shallow ravine and covered them with rocks. No words, no prayers. The mountain had judged them. As the sun slipped behind the ridgeline, Clara sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of pine tea. She was quiet, watching the flames dance. Tosa sat across from her, cleaning his blade. The revolver rested on a stone between them. You could have killed him, he said. She nodded. I wanted to. But you didn't. I don't want to carry that weight. Tosa looked at her with something like pride in his eyes. Then you are stronger than I was. The silence between them now felt different, earned, not empty. The kind of quiet that only came after storms. Clara leaned back, staring at the stars rising through the branches. What happens now? Tosa considered. Snow will come harder soon. We go east. I know a place. A town. He shook his head. A man I trust. He owes me. He has land. Horses. No questions. Clara breathed out slowly. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a cliff. Just a path she hadn't yet walked. She glanced at the revolver, then looked away. I want to learn more, she said. How to move. How to watch. How to be ready. Tosa nodded. You will. Above them, the trees creaked in the wind, their branches stretching toward the stars. And far below, buried in snow and stone, the wolves and men's clothing lay still. The wind carried smoke long before the fire revealed itself. Clara caught it first, a sudden change in the air, sharp, unnatural, tinged with burning pitch. She straightened from where she was skinning a rabbit, her hands still slick. Tosa appeared at the cabin's edge, face already set in that cold, carved stillness she'd come to recognize as his battle sense. He didn't speak. He just sniffed the wind again, eyes narrowing. They had made it far east, since the mountain. A month, maybe more. Time no longer moved in measured steps. Only in sunrises and dangers survived. The rancher who owed Tosa a life had given them shelter. An old line shack near a canyon's edge, well off the usual trails. Horses grazed in a nearby gully. Wood was plentiful. Game was good. But safety, they had both learned, was never permanent. Clara followed him up the ridge overlooking the shack. Tosa crouched beside a narrow pine, scanning the horizon. It didn't take long to see it. A black column of smoke curling upward from the forest's edge to the west. Far too close. He muttered something in Shoshone, low and grim. Could be lightning, Clara offered, though she already knew better. No storm, he replied. That fire was lit. Her heart sank. You think it's them? More of them. Not the same, but the same kind. The next morning, hoof prints were found near the water trough. Not from their own horses. These were larger, shod, and freshly cut into the damp soil. Tosa stared at them a long time. Scouts, he said, testing the place. Clara gritted her teeth. They're not even trying to hide. They think no one out here will stop them. She looked up at him. Will we? He gave a single nod, then turned and walked toward the cabin. The preparations began again. Like a rhythm in his blood, Tosa became the ghost of war once more, quiet, efficient, patient. Clara no longer needed every instruction. She laid traps before being asked, packed food in oilcloth without reminder. She slept lightly, with the knife under her pillow and her boots laced. This time, the threat was not 3 men in the dark. This time, they came with thunder. It began with hooves, 6, maybe 7 horses barreling through the canyon trail, sending up a storm of dust. Clara caught the first glimpse of them through the trees. Wide-brimmed hats, long coats, rifles slung careless across backs. A gang. No colors, no law. Just the kind of men who rode west to outrun their sins. They reined up just outside the cabin. One of them whistled. Well now, said a voice like rusted iron. This place looks real cozy. Clara crouched in the rocks above the slope, her rifle aimed but her finger steady. Tosa was out of sight. They'd agreed, let them make the first move. Another rider dismounted. He kicked the door open without knocking. Empty. Someone's been here, the rust-voiced man said. Wood's fresh. Hide still warm. Not long gone. Could be they're watching us right now, another muttered, scanning the cliffs. Tosa moved like wind between stones. 1 second he was behind Clara. The next, he'd slipped down into a thicket by the base of the trail, bow in hand. Not yet, he whispered when she looked down. But they knew it was close. One of the outlaws kicked over a crate, grumbling. Another began carving something crude into the cabin's door with his knife. They were marking it, claiming it. Then, without warning, the rust-voiced man drew his pistol and fired twice into the air. Clara flinched. Come out now, he called. We ain't here to kill unless you make us. You've got 10 seconds before we burn this shack to cinders. No one moved. 9. Tosa raised his bow. 8. Clara adjusted her aim. 7. The outlaw raised his arm. 6. The arrow struck him through the wrist, clean and sudden. He screamed, the pistol tumbling from his grip. That was the signal. Clara fired. Her shot tore through the brim of the man beside him, knocking him backward with a spray of dust. Then came the thunder. The gang scattered, diving behind logs and boulders, returning fire in all directions. Bullets hissed through the trees like wasps. Clara kept her head low, heart hammering. Tosa moved again, reappearing near the ridge's far side. Another arrow flew. This one struck a horse's flank, sending it into a panic. The beast screamed and bolted, crashing into one of the outlaws and dragging him downslope. Clara chambered another round and breathed out slow. They don't know how many of us there are, she muttered. Tosa's voice came sharp between shots. Make them fear shadows. They did. For hours, the gang fired wildly, shouting to one another across the canyon. But they couldn't find targets. They couldn't find angles. The sun dipped low, and the wind picked up, and every rustle made them twitch. Then, just as night fell, a final arrow flew. This one tipped in pitch, lit at the base. It struck the cabin's roof. The dry thatch caught in seconds. Flames roared skyward. Light exploded across the clearing. The outlaws turned blinded, silhouetted. Clara didn't hesitate. Her next shot dropped the man who had carved the door. Tosa emerged from the darkness like a spirit, knife in hand. 2 more men fled. Only one remained, the rust-voiced leader, now wounded, bleeding from his wrist and crouched beside a half-collapsed wagon. He looked up at Clara's silhouette on the ridge. I've killed better than you, he shouted. She stepped forward, rifle lowered. Then you know how this ends. His hand twitched, toward his boot. Tosa's voice rang out, hard as flint. Don't. But the outlaw moved anyway. Clara fired. The man jerked, slumped sideways, and didn't rise. Silence reclaimed the canyon. Ash drifted through the air like snow. The cabin was gone, just a charred skeleton. But the land was theirs again. Tosa stood beside her now. His face, lit by flickering flame, showed something new. Not pride, not sorrow, but acceptance. She looked at the smoking ruin. We'll need another place. He nodded. I know where. They rode out the next morning. No goodbyes. No graves. Just hoof prints in ash and a sky stretched wide above them. As they passed through the eastern pass, Clara turned for one last look. The wind picked up, lifting her hair, and carried the scent of smoke behind them. She didn't flinch. She'd been forged in fire. And now she rode forward, not as prey, not as a child, but as something entirely new. The mountain had taken her once, but the frontier had given her back.